in South Korea right now. And it's about noon in South Korea right now. And I'm going to do this live stream about South Korea because South Korea is like my second home. So let me get this link posted up and sent to friends if anybody wants to participate in this live stream. So just hang on one second and get this taken care of. And how's everybody doing? I hope everybody is doing well. Hope you guys are doing well. If you guys want to come check out the live stream, so just hang on one second and posting the link. So just hang on one second. Okay. Yes. Talk about South Korea. Okay. Recently, South Korea had its first COVID-19 fatality of somebody that was in their 20s. Now, he had prior health issues besides the COVID. This happened in Busan in the South Gyeongsang province. And ironically, Busan is my favorite city in South Korea. It's a reasonably sized big city, but it's not as big as Seoul. So there's still plenty to do. And it's right next to Haeundae Beach, which I think is a very nice beach to go to and to just chill on the beach. So, yes. So, okay, that is going on. But the guy had cerebrovascular issues as well as the COVID-19, and he passed away from the COVID-19. Typically, South Korea's fatalities from the COVID are typically people 75 or in their 70s or in their 80s, occasionally in their 60s. But I talked about that last stream, and I'm going to talk about something different in South Korea, what's going on in South Korea right now. Right now, South Korea's current president, Moon Jae-in, only has a 37% approval rating. And I don't approve of this guy very much at all, and I will explain why. Okay, the good news is the United States and South Korea have reached a cost-sharing agreement, and South Korea is going to agree to pay 13% more than what they've paid. Now, former President Donald Trump was very unrealistic about what he wanted out of South Korea with this. He wanted South Korea to pay 400% more, and that was just unreasonable. Then he said 50%, but then the compromise was reached at 13% more. But here's the thing. Now, Moon Jae-in wants South Koreans to have operational control over the U.S.-South Korean alliance if North Korea attacks South Korea. Now, what that means is South Korea ultimately decides how to counterattack against North Korea, or if they should surrender, or if they should, about which way they should fight. But at the moment, the United States has operational control over what is going on in South Korea. Now, I firmly believe that the United States should have operational control, and I'm going to explain why. And most Koreans agree with me on this, that the United States should have operational control. Okay? And the reason that South Koreans think that the U.S. should have operational control is because the operational control, if North Korea attacks, a lot of South Koreans have personally told me that we see North Koreans as somebody else of the Korean race. They're our enemy and they're out to hurt us, but they are Korean. And where that means something is South Korea and the entire Korean peninsula a long time ago used to be one country, one nation, one kingdom. Well, and it was an isolated kingdom for a long time. They're known as the Hermit Kingdom. Actually, Korea has the nickname the Hermit Kingdom. They actually have a nickname, a shrimp among whales. They believe they are surrounded by superpowers, but they're not a very important country themselves, is what a lot of Koreans think. So they are not sure how they can handle North Korea if North Korea attacks them, but the U.S. is not there and doesn't have operational control. Now, if the U.S. is leading them to counterattack against North Korea, they firmly believe that they can do that. So the vast majority of South Koreans do not want South Korea to take operational control over the U.S.-South Korean alliance, but President Moon Jae-in wants that, which is a problem. But he also don't want to pay any more of South Korea's share of keeping U.S. soldiers there, and that's another problem. Also, the president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, this is a rumor. Now, I'm not sure how true this is, but he's implementing some fascism himself in speaking out against and using free speech. There is one rumor that if you criticize anything about the 1980 protesters in the Gwangju massacre and the pro-democracy protesters in the 1980 Gwangju massacre, you will get fined 50,000 US dollars. Now, with that being said, I have been to Gwangju several times. I love it when I go to Gwangju. I have been to the 518 Memorial Cemetery in Gwangju and encourage other people to visit. But somebody should not be fined $50,000 for having a different opinion about the Gwangju massacre and the Gwangju uprising. That should not be going on. But there is a rumor that that is what Moon Jae-in wants. And Moon Jae-in's approval rating is at 37%. He's not on a high note because a lot of South Koreans think he eased up restrictions on the COVID-19 too soon. And that's why the COVID-19 is spreading again in South Korea. That he didn't get a handle on the third wave of the COVID-19 like he should have. Also, I firmly believe that a lot of South Koreans are angry that he implemented getting the AstraZeneca vaccine versus getting Pfizer or Moderna, because the AstraZeneca vaccine is 70% to 80% effective against the original COVID-19 strain, but it is not. It's only 10 to 15% effective. It's only 10 to 15% effective against the the 501v2 strain, otherwise known as the South African strain. So I believe that many South Koreans thought that Moon Jae-in should have went with the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine. Those vaccines are 70 to 80% effective against the 501v2 strain. That's what I firmly believe as well. I firmly believe that that would go on. I firmly believe that South Korea wishes that they had the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine. Also, South Korea's economy also is not doing really well right now. They have unemployment is at an all-time high, and jobs are just not available like they used to. It's becoming more and more difficult for many university graduates in South Korea to get a job. Now, some people may ask me, well, Brett, if Moon Jae-in has this low approval rating and people don't approve of his party, the Liberal Party or the Democratic Party of South Korea, why are people voting for him? Well, they're not really voting for his party or him as much as they are voting for a change. Like, prime example, the last president of South Korea, Park Geun-hye, was caught doing things that she shouldn't have done. She was sharing vital national intelligence secrets with a shaman, which you're not supposed to do. And she was caught in a little bit of a corruption scandal. So that's why she got sentenced to prison. So they didn't really elect Moon Jae-in and his party out of liking for them as much as hatred for the other party. And the conservative party, called the Saeun-ri Party, had to disband, and they broke into two political parties. One of them is called Liberty Party Korea. The other one's called, I believe, the Freedom and Justice Party. But they've had to break into two factions. But in spite of that, a North Korean defector ran on the Liberty Party Korea ticket, and he became the first North Korean defector to win office in South Korea. So Moon Jae-in's party is, this coming election is probably not going to get the support that they've had in the past. Also, this last election, there were about 3 or 4 different candidates, and Moon Jae-in got most of the votes out of all the candidates, but no candidate got over 50% of the vote. So that is another thing that has come to mind with Moon Jae-in. Also, 85% of South Koreans want the U.S.-South Korean alliance to stay strong, and they want the U.S. soldiers to remain. Yes, 85% of South Koreans want the U.S. soldiers in South Korea, and they want an alliance with a strong alliance with the United States. And if you ask most South Koreans, they didn't like President Trump for how he treated him, and I don't blame them for that. But they also said that the most trusted ally of South Korea is the United States by far. So that is what's transpiring in South Korea. So yeah, that is basically transpiring right now. Now, one of the things that I wanted to get to, what happened in South Korea, and this Korean American rapper, former rapper, named Gracie TV, she has an excellent YouTube channel that talks about various true crime events in South Korea. She talks about various true crime events in South Korea. So hang on, let me get this posted to another Telegram group if anybody wants to tune in. So just hang on one second. And okay, Gracie TV talks about how this foreign American English teacher named Carolyn Abel, I just recently saw the video, was murdered in South Korea back in 1988. Now, many people, when the body was originally found, thought she was just a victim of a hate crime because xenophobia can flare up in South Korea from time to time. But that wasn't the case. It's more than likely her best friend, Kathy Patrick, murdered her in a fit of rage, and they were best friends when they were in South Korea. So people are wondering, why is all this going on? Why would she murder her best friend? Well, a lady named Sandra was Kathy's roommate, and Sandra had confessed to helping move the body that she didn't, and that Kathy confessed to killing Carolyn Abel. Kathy confessed to killing her, and she helped move the body because she was afraid that Kathy would kill her if she didn't comply. She also said Kathy manipulated her into doing all this. Well, as being an accessory to murder, Sandra only served less than a year in jail and then was allowed to return to the United States. She tried to get the FBI to help the FBI catch Kathy into confessing the murder of Carolyn, but that just wasn't successful. But here's why she said Kathy murdered Carolyn. Kathy, and I'm not sure if Carolyn knew that Kathy was a lesbian, but Kathy told some people that she was a lesbian, and she liked Carolyn, and she thought Carolyn liked her, and she wanted to take the friendship to the next level. Well, Carolyn wasn't gay. She had a fiance named Tomoyuki back in Washington State, where she was from. Back in the United States, she had a fiance named Tomoyuki, and she was engaged. She did not believe that people said, Kathy, this is not going to go well. Don't do this. Carolyn's not gay. She's not going to react very well to this. Well, Carolyn didn't. Carolyn rejected her, said she wasn't gay, said that made her uncomfortable, and Carolyn said that that is just not the case. Well, Kathy, in a fit of rage, stabbed Carolyn about 30 times and then cut her throat from side to side. Kathy even wrote a condolence letter to Carolyn's family and said, I really miss your daughter. I'm sorry that she died. I send you my condolences. But many people now believe that Kathy was the one who murdered Carolyn. The roommate confessed that her and Kathy tried to make it look like somebody had broke in and raped and killed Carolyn. And that's what happened. But since the incident happened in 1988, a lot of remaining evidence that the police took was destroyed. And also, right when the South Korean police was ready to arrest Kathy Patrick, Kathy had fled to the United States. And many people supported her fleeing at first because they thought she didn't have anything to do with the murder, until Sandra said everything that she said, that they thought Kathy was just trying to get away from the publicity, that Kathy was trying to get away from just having the media in her face all the time because she was Carolyn's best friend, and that Kathy was trying to grieve privately. But after testimony and evidence, the South Korean police said they had enough evidence to arrest Kathy for the murder. But when they showed up, Kathy had already fled to the United States. And in 1988, there was not any extradition treaty between South Korea and the United States. There was just not any extradition treaty, so nothing could be done. Unfortunately. And also during that time, if an American killed another American in a foreign country, and fled to the United States, then the American government could not prosecute them. Now, all that changed in 1994. In 1994, that law has changed, but because the crime happened before 1994, the crime happened in 1998, There really wasn't that much that the U.S. government could do. Now, Kathy Patrick lives a quiet life as an academic advisor in Western Washington University. She declines to be interviewed several times. She declines it. And this is also needs to note that when she was in Korea, Kathy did take a polygraph test with the Korean police, but before she fled the U.S., and she failed the polygraph test. She failed the polygraph test miserably, and it was looked at as deception, like very conclusively deceptive. Well, Kathy declined to be interviewed on the American crime show, true crime show, 48 Hours. She declined to be interviewed, but her office at Western Washington University is public property. So the university had permission gave permission to the film crew to just barge in her office and force her to do an interview. Well, she got really nervous and said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about." And she was stuttering and she was shaking. So we don't know this for sure, but more than likely, Kathy Patrick did kill her best friend, Carolyn Abel. And actually, I just found out about the case a few hours ago, but it unfortunately happened in South Korea. And Carolyn Abel, before she taught English in South Korea, she taught English in Japan, and she also taught English in Nepal. And South Korea was going to be her third place to teach English. So that is what's happened in that happened in South Korea back in 1988. I'm going to talk about during the COVID-19, many Ethiopians that have been working and studying in South Korea have done an excellent job helping out South Korea, and I'm going to explain this. Many Ethiopians have gone to donate blood at blood centers during the COVID-19 crisis, mainly because during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was such a shortage of blood amongst to be given because people were scared to go to the blood service centers. Well, many Ethiopians living and working in South Korea went in there to donate their blood to try to help with the shortage of blood that is happening in South Korea. And many Ethiopians are allowed to work and study in South Korea because Ethiopia helped South Korea in the Korean War. And I've discussed that in previous YouTube videos. Ethiopia was the only African country to send ground soldiers to the Korean War. And Ethiopia won every single time they fought against the North Koreans and the Chinese. And not one Ethiopian soldier was ever taken prisoner of war during the Korean War. Well, I've seen at the UN Wall of Remembrance in Busan, at the UN Memorial Cemetery, they have all, on the Ethiopian section, they have the name of all 121 Ethiopians that died in the Korean War. And they have that. Now, no Ethiopians are buried at the UN Memorial Cemetery in Busan. It was always Ethiopian custom to fly the bodies back to Ethiopia and bury them in their homeland of Ethiopia. But South Korea still appreciates Ethiopia's service, and South Korea is one of the top foreign donors to Ethiopia. They help develop hospitals in Ethiopia, particularly for the Ethiopian-Korean War veterans. They also help develop a lot of irrigation systems for Ethiopia, and they're teaching Ethiopia, how to become economically prosperous. And Ethiopia says they want to follow the South Korean model. So I thought that was a very, very interesting piece of information there. Now, with that being said, hopefully, now what South Korea needs to do, they have a good process of people, even Korean nationals coming back to South Korea if they've been in other countries, where somebody has to be they have to be tested in the country they were in the airport. They have to be tested in that country. The test of COVID has to be negative. Also, upon arrival, they have to get tested again, and the test has to be negative. And even if the test is negative, they have to be quarantined for 2 weeks. And then after the 2-week quarantine, they have to be tested again, and the test is negative. So hopefully the 501v2 strain has been found in South Korea, but it's only been like 2 or 3 different cases. So hopefully this will help curb the spread of the COVID-19 in South Korea. Hopefully it will. I'm not saying it will, not saying it won't. But now, okay, in Moon Jae-in's defense, there was, people needed to stay out of churches, I firmly believe, more than they did. Well, a lot of South Koreans did, but this one anti-Moon Jae-in preacher he has a big congregation church in Seoul, and he had about 5,000 or 6,000 members. Well, he told the members to come back to church, defy the COVID-19 order. So they come in there, they go to church. Well, the COVID-19 spreads in Seoul rapidly. So the Moon Jae-in government files a charge on the guy for the guy of violating of spreading the COVID-19. And I can understand why they did that. I mean, I can understand why people were angry at Moon Jae-in and they wanted the U.S.-South Korean alliance to be stable. But he shouldn't have called the people to come back to church so soon and to go and protest. And when they protested, when they had this pro-American protest, which I agreed with what the protesters were saying, but many of them weren't wearing masks, they weren't social distancing, and it led to an increase of the spread of the COVID. There should have been petitions and leaflets, and they should have went about it another way, and they still should have done a lot of their services, online services, virtually. So if you guys have any questions or anything in the comments, feel free to type in, and I will be happy to answer your questions. Also, if you go, I've never been to this place in Chuncheon, South Korea. I've actually never been to Chuncheon. But if you go to Chuncheon, South Korea, there are huts that look just like Ethiopian huts. And inside there's an Ethiopian coffee shop. Coffee is a big industry in Ethiopia, and Ethiopian coffee apparently is very, very popular in South Korea. Well, there's also a lot of Korean War memorabilia and memorials dedicated to the the Ethiopian soldiers in the Korean War. And the shop and the museum is actually not ran by Ethiopians, it's ran by South Koreans. And these were some South Koreans whose parents and grandparents got to know the Ethiopian soldiers in the Korean War. And outside the coffee shop and the memorial, there is a huge monument that is dedicated to all the Ethiopian soldiers of the Korean War. Now, I regret having not seen that monument and coffee shop and memorial when I was in South Korea the last time, but hopefully it will change and I will be able to see that memorial again. And that is a very, that's the thing that I want to see, because Ethiopia had 7 battalion combat flags in the Korean War, and it's disgraceful if your combat flag was given up or was captured by the enemy. Well, all 7 battalion combat flags were never captured by the enemy, and all 7 battalion combat flags that Ethiopia had were returned to Ethiopia after the Korean War. So I firmly believe that people do need to visit the memorial in Chuncheon and go to the coffee shop there if you've been there. If you can't go, do what I did. If you go to the Korean War Memorial in the Yongsan section of Seoul, in the Yongsan section of Seoul, they have a really good, it's memorials for all the wars that South Korea has been in, but they have a really good Korean War section that I recommend that you guys check out. Currently, right now, Ethiopia is in the Tigray region is having a lot of separatist issues, and Ethiopian soldiers have had to go there and try to quell rebellions. Now, it's hard to know who's more at fault, the Ethiopian soldiers or the Tigray rebels. A lot of the Tigray rebels have been disguised as civilians and have not complied with a lot of orders. And so it's really hard for the Ethiopian soldiers to know who the enemy really is, unfortunately. Now, that is going on. And then also right now, Ethiopia is in a border dispute with Sudan right now. There's a lot of fertile farming land right on the Ethiopia-Sudan border. Sudan claims it is its own, and Ethiopia claims it is their own. And Sudan and Ethiopia right now are at odds with each other, saying each other's soldiers crossed into each other's territory. So just pray for peace in that region. Pray that peace and stability come to Ethiopia and come to Sudan. Recently, that had been reported on the news about what's going on in Ethiopia and in Sudan. So that's the latest what I've heard when I looked up articles on Ethiopia, and I saw that was transpiring. That was transpiring in Ethiopia. So that's the latest that has happened. All right. The other thing that I wanted to get to, I would not recommend that many South Korean nationals visit the Philippines right now. Because their president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, has done a horrible job containing the COVID-19 virus. There are 500,000 cases of the COVID-19 existing in the Philippines right now, and the Philippines did not even go with the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is 70% effective against the original COVID-19 strain. They went with the Sino vaccine, which is only 50.4% effective against the original COVID-19 strain. And many Filipinos are angry with the Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte for having the going with the Sino vaccine instead of going with the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine. So I recommend that many Koreans stay out of the Philippines until the Philippines gets their COVID-19 situation under control. And I know the Philippines did many amazing things in the Korean War, and I've done several videos on that. But at the same time, the COVID-19 situation is just not stable enough in the Philippines to be able to do that. So that's just it's just unfortunately, it's a difficult situation for the Philippines to be going through. So just hang on 1 second. I'm going to get this. Get this posted to a Telegram group if anybody wants to tune in. So just hang on 1 second, and hang on 1 second if anybody wants to tune in. So just hang on 1 second, and I will get that tended to. Just hang on. All right, if anybody do have any comments or questions, please feel free to type in below. And if you guys have any comments or questions, feel free to just ask me anything if you guys want to do that. I can talk about any other things that you guys want to talk about. That is fine by me. And like I said, be happy to, because that's a lot of the latest news that I got out of South Korea and a lot of the latest news that I got out of Ethiopia. Props to the person who tuned in. I understand it's a lunch break right now in South Korea. Many people's lunch breaks may be over. I understand that too. So that's it's not a big deal. All right. Let me think. Okay. One further thing that I wanted to discuss about South Korea right now. One of the biggest things in South Korea, because everybody lives in apartments and they're stacked up on one another. South Korea is a notorious place for people complaining about noisy neighbors, and noisy neighbors is one of the main nuisances for many South Koreans. I recently had read this article in English about how this one guy had his neighbors above him were playing loud music, and he said it normally didn't bother him, and if it got too loud, he would talk to the landlord, and the landlord typically nicely reminded them to cut the music down. It wasn't a big deal. Well, 5 a.m., he started complaining about hearing sex noises from his neighbors upstairs. The neighbors must be either an engaged or a married couple. Well, after that happened, he said, he just told the press this. He says, I feel really uncomfortable telling my landlord this, or the police, or even the couple themselves, because sex is a very private thing. That is actually one of the main reasons that in South Korea, because it's very, very hard for couples to have privacy. Yeah, there's this thing in South Korea, and a lot of them look like castles on the outside, look like Cinderella's castle at Disney World or something like that. But if something looks like a fantasy castle, it's typically what one may call a love motel. And that doesn't always equal people having affairs. That's not always the case. Sometimes it's the married couple or the engaged couple themselves going into the love motel because they want to be able to have an area where the neighbors don't know they're having sex, and then their children don't know they're having sex right at the moment, because it is very, very hard in South Korea, because the landmass, South Korea is about the size of Mississippi, but my home state, Mississippi, only has about 3 million people. Well, the entire nation of South Korea has 50 million people, over 50 million people. So space is a huge, huge issue in South Korea. And because of that, there aren't many what you may call elm and picket fence neighborhoods with houses. No, most South Koreans live in apartments. Almost all of them do. If you go to the countryside, you'll see a few houses here and there. And I've seen some and been in some. But particularly in the city where one typically has to live and work, there it's almost always apartments. I mean, even Jeonju, which is one of the smaller cities in South Korea, but it still had about 300,000 to 500,000 people. The vast majority of people in Jeonju still lived in apartments, and they were like high-rise apartments, and Jeonju was not a big city by South Korean standards. So that is one of the major issues that goes on in South Korea, which is land shortage, and that is a issue over there. One thing I do miss in South Korea, that South Korea is a very safe country. It's an extremely safe country. There are murder incidences and robberies just like everywhere, but at the same time, in South Korea, most places, I was very comfortable and felt very comfortable walking the streets at 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 a.m., sometimes 1 a.m., sometimes 2 a.m., and never felt like I was going to get mugged. You can't really do that in the United States, and definitely you cannot do that in South Africa. Now, there are parts of Itaewon that were a little bit sketchy that I wouldn't necessarily go past midnight, but until 10 p.m. or 11 p.m., I was fine even going to the Itaewon section in South Korea. So it's a very safe country. Also, the healthcare is not as good like in the United States, but at the same time, the healthcare overall is good, and the healthcare, because it's half private, half public, the healthcare is super cheap compared to the USA as well. And if you're a foreign English teacher in South Korea, you're still covered via health insurance with whatever company you teach with. That was always a plus as well. And they gave you a lot, if you had a sinus infection or a cold, they gave you good antibiotics and good medicine to help knock the cold out, and you would be able to continue with your daily life. That is another thing I really liked about South Korea. Also, the scenery. South Korea is about 70% mountainous. But when it's cloudy on cloudy days, the clouds come down to the mountains, and the clouds and the mountains kind of blend in. That's really good scenery. Also, the creeks, the rocks look like perfectly manicured and perfectly placed, and the creek flows the way the creek flows with the rocks. It's really amazing scenery. I miss the scenery of South Korea very, very much. The scenery, it's a really beautiful country, I firmly believe. So miss that. I miss that about South Korea. I miss the safety as well. Miss the scenery. What I don't miss is some of the issues with xenophobia. South Korea has gotten better with that, but it is like, in the United States, people can immigrate to the United States, whether if they're Korean or Japanese, and through citizenship process, you can become an American, and you're an American citizen. It is possible for foreigners to become citizens of South Korea. That's not as much of an issue. But you are still never going to be officially accepted into the South Korean society very much unless you have pure Korean blood. Nobody's going to violently threaten you. Nobody is going to do that. But a lot of school children sometimes say they have trouble making friends with somebody, even though they can speak Korean and know Korean culture, but they don't have pure Korean blood. A lot of school children say they can't completely be friends with somebody like that. It's gotten better, but the situation still has a ways to go, to be honest with you. So it's very, very difficult for foreigners to stay in South Korea long term and to be completely accepted by the South Korean society as an equal. South Koreans kind of view being South Korean more as a race than necessarily a nationality. It's a lot better than before, and I'm not discouraging people to not try to do it if that's what they want to do, but it's still a difficult process. And it's very, like I said, it's very, very hard to explain, but you got to live there and you got to understand. If you live there for about 6 months, you'll understand it. You'll understand that process. So, I don't miss the xenophobia. That's one of the things that I don't miss as well. Another thing that I don't miss, I really liked visiting Seoul, and I really like, and this kind of ties in with the apartments. I don't miss the crowdedness, particularly Seoul, South Korea. But a lot of South Korea outside the countryside, even then, is very, very crowded. It's a very congested country. I mean, the people there are very creative, and they're very they know how to make the best of it. But I don't miss the crowdedness, and just pretty much any and everywhere you go in South Korea outside of the countryside, it's very, very crowded almost all the time. I don't miss, like I said, the crowdedness. Don't miss that as well. Another thing. Well, I mean, another thing. Let me think. Another thing that I don't miss. Okay. No, one thing that I actually do miss is that the public bus transportation system in America, our public buses are not safe. The bus station's one of the worst places you can get mugged. South Korea's bus terminals are very clean, they're very efficient, and they're very, very safe. And I had zero problems or zero issues riding the buses when I was over there. Very, very few, if any, issues when riding the bus over there. When riding the bus over there, it was very convenient. Now, it can be crowded sometimes, but the buses there are, more than likely not going to get mugged. You're not going to get, you're not going to get murdered at the bus station. That's a very rare thing to have happen. I never even witnessed anything like that at the bus station, much less had it happen to me. I never even witnessed it. That's another thing that I do miss, actually. One of the other things that I don't miss, now this is rare, but like if you're a foreigner, sometimes people may think you're stupid or that you don't understand Korean, so you'll have many cab drivers or some cab drivers try to rip you off if they take you somewhere. Prime example, when I came back from Japan on a flight, I was a little bit later, but I was pretty sure that the bus terminal was open. I mean, that it was open and I could take the bus. Well, the cab driver said, no, they're closed. I'll just take you to Jeonju. It ended up being a $120 US cab ride from Busan to Jeonju, because Jeonju didn't have a major international airport that I could fly to Japan from. So that happened one time. Another time that happened, it was like a $3 cab ride from the baseball stadium to the hotel, but the cab driver said, give me $30. And the police is becoming more open-minded, but I knew over a $27 discrepancy, it wasn't worth arguing with the cab driver over, because typically sometimes in that situation, they may side with a Korean over a foreigner. Now, if you are a victim of a violent xenophobic attack, which are rare, or if you are a victim of an armed robbery, call the police. The police will help you then. But something that little, I more than likely thought they were going to side with the Korean over a foreigner. So, but don't be scared to call the police if your life is in danger. You will be helped. All right. So basically that sums up my live stream about South Korea. Thanks you guys for tuning in. I hope everybody's doing well. Take care. God bless. And bye-bye. Bye-bye.